So welcome everybody to the session today. We're talking with Dr. Rawan. She's our guest today, Rawan Al-Heresh. Thank you, Rawan Al-Heresh, for joining us.
Yep.
And we will be talking about health sciences. If you have any questions, guys, we can take your questions later on. Rawan, usually I start with, like a basic steps that they need to start with, or the first step they need to think of. And I always tell them, find or look for the institution that you are interested in. Because sometimes the universities and even departments have different requirements. Okay,
Sure.
يعني الجامعة عندها المتطلبات المختلفة. What sometimes it's the graduate school has some requirements. The graduate school شباب, it's the department أو خلينا نقول القسم المسؤول عن الدراسات العليا بالجامعة. So مسؤول عن الماسترز والPhD applications and so on and the requirements. So sometimes بيكون عندنا requirement مطلوب من the graduate school, but you also have to check the department website and see what their requirements. Do you think there's a very first basic step you would recommend for them to start with?
Yes. The very first thing that you should think about is what are your priorities? Okay. So this, I think, is essential, and it's an integral, step that each student should think about before they embark on this journey. Graduate school is, I don't want to say it's hard, it's not, but you need to have your life figured out, because it's a huge time commitment. That's, I think, what is the most important tenet here. It's not going to be like a year or 2 years, especially if you're embarking on a PhD journey. Usually, you're talking about three to 4 years. Sometimes it extends to be 7 to 8 years, depending on where your program, ends up. So you have to make sure that your personal life is taken care of. You know what your priorities are before you start searching for the most perfect place for you. So, for example, when I started, I had a 10-month-old child, and finding daycares was essential for me. So I wouldn't go into a school or a university that didn't, for example, have good daycares close by, or a department that was requiring me to be there like 24 hours a day. That wasn't going to be suitable for me, and that wasn't going to be helpful for me. So my priority was to search for a department or search for universities that has these things. And I think you have to ask yourself, what are your priorities? So when you have these frank discussions with yourself, with your family, if you're alone, and if you're single and you're not married, maybe you want to ask yourself, what are my priorities? Do I need to find a paid position? Do I need to find tuition reimbursement, for instance, or scholarships? Do I need to find, for instance, a place that has accommodation within the university that is safe? So you have to ask yourself, what are your priorities? Maybe, for example, I have a lot of people that say, oh, I have a relative that lives in California, so I want to live close to them, because, maybe that will limit your choices, and you will start searching for areas that are close to where your relatives are. So, have a frank, discussion and reflection with yourself and your family, and identify what are your priorities first, and start your search with those priorities in mind. So this is usually my first step.
Okay, this is amazing. Thank you, Rawan.
Yeah.
I think you're brave to have a child and finish your PhD.
Yeah.
I was single and I thought it wasn't easy. I was a TA as well, and I was the main instructor of the class. I wasn't assisting a professor. It wasn't easy, but I had a lot of my friends had kids, and I think they're brave. And I was like, how do they finish their PhD having a child? It's not.
Yeah.
So you're talking about priorities. يعني أول شيء بدنا نفكر شباب, do I have a child? If you have a child, you have to think definitely of expenses. روان, عادة طلاب عنا أو members على الجروب الأردنيين, they're interested in what we call a scholarship. I don't call it really a scholarship لأنه it's an assistantship. عنا بالمفهوم العربي يمكن scholarship إنه they have funding for me, they pay everything for me, and that's it. But in return, basically إحنا بندور على teaching assistantship أو research assistantship.
Yeah.
It could be a grant through a professor, بس أنا بعمل مساعد في البحث or so on, صح؟ فعادة لما بيكون عندنا assistantship شباب, إذا قدمتوا على assistantship, I keep saying شباب because this is what I use with my students, we're guys. But لما بتقدموا على assistantship يعني إحنا عنا monthly stipend $1200. Most likely it's that range. أحيانا بيعطوكم سكن, and so the cash would be, or your salary would be like 600 maybe or 500. So بدنا نفكر إذا أنا عندي طفل then I need daycare at least يمكن $1000 بالشهر. إذا أنا single I think it's fine, بتلاقوا سكن خلينا نقول $700 to $800, ممكن 600. والباقي حيكون life expenses. هلا أنا دايما بقول always target the Midwest. شوي the East Coast, Boston is super expensive, California is expensive, apartments, everything is more expensive than the Midwest area. تحديدا انه احنا عندنا بالاردن ما في يعني هالكم الهائل من ال scholarships to Jordanians, right? So the first thing we need to think of are priorities, and then we need to think of assistantships, scholarships, where do I go, expenses, and so on. So Rawan, هلا we decided, you know, let's say I want to go to Indiana, and I'm going to Indiana University Bloomington. I have to definitely I find the department and I look for scholarships. What's next? What do you think? How do they find, I don't want to say scholarship again, assistantship. How do they find assistantship? How do they talk to the professor in health sciences and all that?
Okay, so again, the first question, I think, after determining what your priorities are is, what degree are you targeting? So in health sciences, we have two different tracks. We have the research tracks and we have the clinical tracks. And there's, I think, some misconceptions amongst Jordanian students when they are applying. So, for example, the clinical tracks, usually they're like PharmD degrees, physical therapy doctorates, occupational therapy doctorates, Masters of Public Health, and sometimes like a Doctor of Public Health, DPH as well. These are clinical tracks, and these clinical tracks, first of all, they can't have them they can't have them transferred to Jordan, and so that's the first dilemma that they have to be aware of. And the second thing is they should be targeting, if they are interested in higher education, which is like the traditional master's and PhD degrees, they're supposed to not look at the clinical, you know, doctorates or the tracks that we mentioned, but go for the Masters of Science in a specific health science or a PhD in a specific health science. So I would encourage you to start thinking about which are, you know, like think about what your profession is or what your discipline is. Let's say I want to take public health, for example. So searching for a Masters of Public Health, that is going to be very helpful for Jordanian students, because first of all, we said that you can't really have the degree transferred to Jordan. It doesn't equate to anything in the Jordanian system. So what I would encourage them to do is to search for Masters of Sciences in health sciences, or Masters of Science in epidemiology, for example, which is another term for public health or a specific area in public health, and so on. So the first thing that they can do is just do a simple Google search for top 20 programs or top 10 programs in Masters of Science and then insert what their discipline is, or a PhD in what their discipline is, and then identify what these tracks are, and avoid all the clinical tracks and just focus on the research ones. So make sure that it has the word Masters of Science or Doctorate of Philosophy before the name of the degree, because that is going to be essential for them here. So once they determine, for example, like the top 10 universities in like a PhD track in a specific health science, what they can do is go specifically, again, go to Google and just type in PhD in Rehabilitation Sciences in Indiana University or whatever university you just listed. And then, you know, the requirements usually come up and they pop up. These are, we have multiple areas where we can start searching for funding. Universities are usually divided into 3 tiers. I don't know if you're familiar, if your students here are familiar with that. In the USA, there's a Research 1 university, there's a Tier 2, R2, and there's an R3 or teaching university. So they're differentiated in 3 different levels. Usually R1 universities, they're high research activity, and which means they have multiple PhD programs, they have multiple postdoctoral fellowship programs, they have multiple, you know, Masters of Science programs, etc. R2 universities, they do have some PhDs, but not as much. and they don't rely 100% on getting money from research. So it means that they're not very research active. And what I want you to think about here is the more research there is in a university, the more PhD positions, the more scholarships, the more assistantships you're going to get. So you want to target those R1 universities. So usually state schools are considered R1 universities. So if you search, for example, University of Florida, University of Massachusetts, University of California, like university of the name of the state, usually they're state funded and they're very, very high research intensive schools, and they typically have a lot of assistantships and scholarships for PhD students in rehabilitation and health sciences. So you can start by searching like, you know, the top 20 schools and then filtering them out. Which one is the R1 university, which one is the R2 university, which one is the R3. And then as you start looking into the pages, you start seeing the faculty that are in there. Each person teaching in the, you know, school, you want to see how many of them have PhDs themselves. If a department has like 10 professors and only one of them has a PhD, that's not a very good indication for you. So you want to basically search for schools that have a lot of PhD professors, because typically they're the ones who have a lot of funding from grants, and they're the ones who typically would offer the assistantships and the scholarships. Having said that, big schools, the ones that are like R1 university, they typically have spots that are always guaranteed regardless of professors' offerings. So if a college, for example, is specific for health sciences, usually they have like 4 spots for PhD students every single year. And that will be a teaching assistantship or like a doctoral assistantship. They have multiple names, but what, as you said, Juman, what they typically have is like a solid, let's say 20-hour a week, usually it doesn't exceed 20 hours a week of work. And what you do is you assist professors in teaching, you assist them in research, or you assist them in other tasks, such as like a graduate assistantship, like assisting in like a library or, you know, other settings in the school. And in exchange, your tuition would be free, or you would pay very, very limited, like maybe like registration fees or something very minimal. So you have, you know, some spots secured by the college, or you can find the professors who have like a lot of research, a lot of, you know, grants, a lot of lab work. Usually when they have like an active grant, they have spots for PhD students, and you want to search for these professors. So these are the 2 ways that you can find assistantships and scholarships.
Okay, Rawan, thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's amazing and very clear explanation. Do you think that, you know, those R1 are very competitive? If say somebody is not, you know, they have maybe their English is not that good, or they're not really ready to graduate school, but they're really interested. Do you think they can go with their master's to R2 and then for PhD jump into R1? Or even for masters, you know, they can do 1 year or 1 semester somewhere and then move somewhere else. What do you think about that competitiveness part? And then that we might not be ready, but we're really interested, then we want to pursue our master's and PhD. What do you recommend?
Yeah, I recommend to only apply when you are 100% certain that you have all the requirements top notch. So if you have, like, let's say if the requirements are you get like this score in GRE, this score in IELTS or TOEFL, and you have like 3 excellent like recommendation letters, maybe let's say you have like a few points less in the GRE, and then you think, oh, I'm going to push it and write like a very good cover letter or statement purpose, you know, personal statement. My advice for you is to don't, because we get hundreds of applications and they're all excellent applications. And what we do is, you know, the people who don't even meet the requirements, we don't even see them. So that they never fall on my desk. I only see the ones that have, you know, matched all the requirements. And let me tell you, the ones that match the minimum requirements are usually, again, hundreds of applicants. And we usually, like, what ends up on my desk is being basically the top 10% of whoever meets the requirements. So let's say everyone has, you know, the requirements met, and we got like 50 applications that met the requirement. I only see 5 to 7 of these, and to give admittance to maybe like 3 or 4 students. So it's very, very competitive, and you want to make sure that you really work really hard on all the elements of your application. because it's not cheap to apply for PhD and master's program. The admissions fees are expensive, and they range between $100 to $250 per university. And if you want to apply for like 10 or 15 programs, you're talking about $1,000 to $2,000. And that's not, a sum of money that is easily accessible to anyone, especially if you're just, starting your research embarkment. And so you want to be very thorough. And my advice for you is to work very, very hard on your application and select the top 2 or 3 of your choices, and make sure that you tick every single box and do 100% more of what they're asking you if you want to have a chance in the assistantships.
Okay, amazing.
Yeah.
I still encourage students. So I have a lot of our members, sometimes they have long experience. They were not planning to do their master's. They were young. They finished their BA with a GPA less than 3. I still encourage them to find some universities where they can join, start the first semester, work hard. Now you're, more mature, you have the experience, you feel like, I really want to do my master's, but you know what? I didn't do well in my BA or my undergrad. I encourage them to start with any university, start somewhere, get a higher GPA, and then target higher universities. What do you think about that thinking?
I think that's a pretty reasonable approach. And but we say in Arabic يعني رحم الله امرئ عرف قدر نفسه. لما انت مثلا يكون ال GPA is like 2.5 and your IELTS is like barely reaching the minimum, and then you say, oh, I want to get a scholarship. That's just not going to happen. Okay, so we have to truthfully know what we are able to achieve and what we can't. Nevertheless, it does not mean that you don't have a pathway to being successful and to get to the R1 universities and get an assistantship maybe from in 3 or 4 years from now, but just not right now. And as you said, there's always a way if you're willing to put in the work, if you're willing to put in the effort. And typically, I don't have a lot of experience with master's admission. I do a lot of PhD admissions, and I see a lot of applicants who have like their bachelor's of science, GPA is less than what we require, but then in the master's they get like a full 4.0 GPA. That is the kind of person that I would love to admit, because that person has been through the failure and jumped up. Okay, so this is a trait that that I train people to get when they're in their PhD, and this person has already gone through that path. So basically, I favor, admitting people who have gone through that, but nevertheless, they need to accompany that with a full application, with scores that reflect their growth, and they have to write a very good personal statement reflecting the growth trajectory that has happened with them, and have clarity in their goals, and they have clarity in what they want to do with their with their career moving forward. So I completely agree with you, and I think that is definitely a plausible option, but as I said, we have to be realistic. Things we can't have everything immediately, but if you have a plan and you work for it slowly, you surely will get there. And as I said, like the majority of the applications we get are perfect, and you have to distinguish yourself somehow if you want to get through.
Yes, and we need to remember that we are competing with people from all over the world, Asia, Europe, and everywhere, right?
Yes.
Okay, and do you have, like on top of your head, universities that you recommend for health sciences?
For health sciences, I think there are lots and lots of great universities. I think in Boston, we have plenty. We have over 95 universities in Massachusetts. And, we have, like the school that I work at, it's, Massachusetts General Hospital. It's the teaching hospital of Harvard University. We have a lot of graduate programs for health sciences, masters and PhDs. Boston University is an excellent school for people who are interested in public health. They have a very good concentration in epidemiology, global health, and public policy and health informatics. Also, I think the University of Pittsburgh is also a great option, and that is a lot cheaper than here. I think all the a few universities in California, I'm always going like to the very expensive options, like UC San Diego, UCLA. They have excellent programs. But as I said, it depends on the major. So like like my school, for example, we don't have a program in public health, but Boston University does. So you have to know what your discipline is and search for, like, you can start with just skimming through what are the top 20, what are the top 50 schools, and just start from there and see where that takes you.
Okay, and we have some of the questions, but we will talk a little bit more about TOEFL and GRE and the required exams. So for TOEFL, usually on the university's website, you can see that they're requiring 79, 80, sometimes a little bit more. And for people applying or trying to get an assistantship, do you think it has to be higher than 90, higher than 100? Most likely in the languages fields and the linguistics, you have to have more than 90 in order to teach and communicate with American students and handle all the responsibilities you have. What can you say about the scores in TOEFL and GRE for?
Yeah, so if we have, so usually the graduate school or the registrar, they usually handle the requirements, not the college or the department per se. So I never, I see the scores of the students, but it's not up to me to say I can admit or, disqualify someone because of their score. So if someone meets the minimum requirement, there is no preference taken beyond that. Yes.
Teaching assistant.
Yes. So for example, if we have like 2 applicants that I'm looking at, I will never choose one over the other just because they have a higher TOEFL score or IELTS score, considering that they met the minimum requirement. I'll be looking for something else. Okay. So in health sciences, it doesn't necessarily, matter.
And anything about GRE scores? Do you have any comment about that?
Yeah, so GREs, what happens is we typically have like a formula, we have like an algorithm. The GRE has a specific like percentage. So if your score is this much, it gets like multiplied by a specific number. And so the higher you get, the higher your representative number is going to be. So I think for a GRE, the higher your scores, the better your chances are.
Can you talk a little bit more about these details if they're interested, about like a specific result or score that makes our chance of acceptance higher?
Yeah, sure. So we look at the quantitative portion a lot more than the writing portion, especially if you have, because as an international student, you're required to do the TOEFL and the IELTS, and that is a good representation of your language skills. We also don't take a lot of consideration into the writing or the TOEFL or the IELTS if you have publications. That's also another thing. So if you have shown us that you have published in like really good journals in health sciences, it clearly demonstrates that you do have the ability to communicate, whether it's by written English or other means that you are able to communicate. So that doesn't really count as much. So typically in the algorithm that we have like the language test, we have the GRE, recommendation letters, and then we have something called life experiences. So if someone who has, for example, this is a question that we get a lot of the time. Like, I've been out of school for 10 years. So I finished my master's degree 10 years ago. Does this make me less appealing for a PhD? I say, no, that makes you completely the opposite, because you have had so much experience in these 10 years that I care about as a scientist. And so these life experiences, they have a say in the algorithm that we have. And we also, as I said, the recommendation letters. This is something that we fail, I think, a lot of the time to utilize. And it weighs in health sciences just as much as GREs do. And usually, unfortunately, what happens is people pay very minimal attention to recommendation letters. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen the same template like submitted over and over again. I even had, like, in the same pool, 2 people submit exactly the same recommendation letter, like the same professor, like, they emailed us the same recommendation letter, they just changed the name of the student. And of course, these people were like disqualified, because we can't trust that the person who wrote the recommendation letter is telling the truth. He's just using a cookie cutter for everyone. So I think one of the underutilized areas that you guys can, always work on, and it's easy to get. It's not as hard as studying for the GRE, and is to work on making sure that your recommendation letters are truly a reflection of your experiences and your passion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. And do you think that this, what you mentioned about, publication versus TOEFL and GRE scores, does that apply? Do you think it applies to most of the universities and how departments think about scores versus publication and English proficiency?
Yes. So again, English proficiency, if you receive that, if you've achieved like the minimum threshold, you're fine. But if you have a publication, you're going to get like a few percentages above others just because of the algorithm. But the algorithm is all adding everything together. So someone might have like better recommendation letters, so they might be just the same level as someone who has a publication. So we add everything together, and it's like a application per, on each has their own case.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Rawan. And we have a
Yeah.
question about requirements for PhD of public health. We'll get to
Yes.
this, but I have one thing to mention. So you talked about how you have the same professor submitting the same recommendation letter for different students, just changing the name,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yes.
But this is funny because definitely I submit recommendation letters every time for my students, but then you have to have something different, especially if you're targeting the same place. This is funny, but so what I want to say, the first thing is personal statement or statement of purpose or motivational letter. I have a sample on my group. Guys, make sure when you look at my sample and watch the video that I made commenting on this personal statement, how to write one. And remember, I have 7,000 Jordanians. If at least 100 people used it and applied to the same university, make sure you have something different. You don't want to be a copy of another Jordanian, right?
Yes.
Perfect. Yes. And so what do you think about the requirement? Can you tell us more about the requirements for PhD of public health?
Yes. So for PhDs in health sciences and public health, I think what distinguishes this from other disciplines is that we always look for someone who has clinical experience. Specifically, if you're doing like a clinical, a scientific track, clinical PhD. So for example, in the school that I teach in and the one that I am employed at, we require 3 to 5 years of clinical experience in hospital settings before you apply to a PhD. Because what we want is someone who's been in practice, who's been in the field, who knows what the shortage is in research. And, like you have identified the population in mind, you identified the research question, and then you're coming in with this idea of us where we can teach you how to do specific research methodologies so you can apply. So I think this is what differentiates health sciences from other programs, is that sometimes we do require the practical experience. I saw that someone was also asking about the merged tracks where people can jump from like a bachelor's to like a combined Masters of Science and a PhD. You don't see this as much as in other disciplines. What happens typically is that you will be on something that we call like a fast track PhD. It's not necessarily a fast track, because what happens is, if you think about it, like a master's degree is 2 years, and then you have a PhD that is typically 4 years. So that's like the norm, more or less. So 2 years plus 4 years is 6 years. And what they give you in the fast track is the option of doing it in like 5.5 years. So you're like saving 6 months of your life, And what happens is, like, they use some of the credits that you do in your Masters of Science and they transfer them to the PhD. And then you can, use it to like reduce the credits load by like a semester only.
Sorry, I want to interrupt. So you're saying that they can transfer credits from master's to PhD, but that's only if they're doing master's and PhD in the same university. Maybe it's right?
Yes.
Maybe they can transfer credits from one master's to the PhD from different universities, but that would be less of credit hours.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I have never seen a student transfer master's credits to PhD credits and got more than 3 or 6 credits out of them. So a course or 2, and that's it.
Yeah, that would be basic research classes that they, maybe they had a publication, they proved that, well, I know basic research classes or research methods and so on, so I don't need that basic class. You're right. Okay, and do you want to say something about requirements, other requirements?
Yes, so as you know, typical international, you know, student requirements, the English proficiency test, including TOEFL and or the IELTS. Some universities are allowing the option of Duolingo because of the, you know, COVID-19 restrictions. A lot of schools these days have waived the GRE, the graduate record examination, and we've done a few studies in the past where we examine the difference between students who have very high GREs versus ones who have very low GREs, and it really doesn't impact the success of the student in a PhD program. So GREs, English proficiency exam, recommendation letters, you have to have them ready, and have at least 3 really good ones. And when you think about recommendation letters, I can't tell you how important it is to have a personal relationship with the person who's going to be writing them. We mentioned this before, and I can't tell you how important it is here. And it's not something that you start working on now and you expect to have it in a month. Usually when you get into school, when you start your bachelor's of science or your bachelor's of art, you start cultivating these relationships with your professors because you have in mind that you're going to go into graduate school afterwards. So make sure that you visit their office hours, try to ask if they need help in any of their projects and their requirements. You have to show them those traits that graduate schools are looking for so they can write about them when they write your recommendation letters afterwards. And, you know, it's so easy to tell when a professor, excuse me, knows someone, or if, you know, they're just writing like a typical letter. And again, I can't emphasize the importance of these. So have at least, you know, 3 recommendation letters ready. And when you start preparing them, you know, like professors are usually extremely busy. So one advice that I usually give people is offer your professor to write a draft. So you can email them or call them and say, I'm applying to this program and they're requiring that I submit 3 recommendation letters. Do you mind writing me one? I understand how limited your time is. I'm happy to draft, one of these for you, and then you can modify it accordingly to make it easier. And so the TOEFL, GRE recommendation letters, and the experience, so the clinical experience, you have to also have your CV prepared. CV is very different than a resume, so it's going to look very different than what you have in the industry. So if you've worked in a hospital before, the academic CV is going to look extremely different. It's going to have your education in the beginning, and it's going to have your accomplishments as a scientist. Maybe you worked as a research assistant, you know, with one of the professors in Jordan, or like in a, you know, research industry, you know, organization. You have publications, you have, you know, conference proceedings. These are the types of things that you want to display, and so have your CV ready. And then each school is going to ask you for different essays as well. So some schools ask for personal statements, some ask for an admissions essay, others ask for like a motivation letter. Motivation letter is usually, you know, asked in European schools. So make sure that you are, that you know exactly what documents each program has. And I encourage you all to, as I said, you know, you start off with the list of universities, select only a few, like 2 or 3, maximum 3 that you really want to target, and make sure that you have prepared every single thing to your best ability, and take it from there. So usually these are what you need to have ready. In addition to the application fee, which is, have like a source of, I don't know, like a credit card or something, ready, so you can have everything, sorted out by the time that you hit the submit application button.
Amazing. Okay, Rawan, talking about the recommendation letters, I work with panels. We give scholarships to our students to study abroad, and usually Americans they always want to have at least 1 or 2 sentences talking about the person, attitude and personality. Do you think this is important? Like, we always want to see that this student is open-minded, willing to meet people from different cultures, somebody coming to the US in concept. Can you say something about that? Is it something you would look at, you want to see at least 1 or 2 sentences about?
Yes, we definitely want to see characteristics and skills and personality traits that are, of people that we want to work with. Just think about your own environment. Who are you happy working alongside? You want people that are happy. You want people that are friendly. You want people that are approachable. You want people that can communicate well. And you want to think about, where do problems arise in the workplace? Usually if people can't communicate properly, usually if they're not team players, usually if they want to bash each other's accomplishments. And this is what we want to avoid. So make sure that you write in there that, you know, I don't want you to come up with things that aren't true, but talk about, you know, your traits that make you a very accessible person. So what makes you unique amongst your friends? So if I ask your friends about you, what would they say? So you want to, you know, write some of these things down and link them to, you know, being a graduate student. So saying, like, for example, I'm a funny person, that's not helpful because I'm not going to benefit from you being funny in a PhD. But for example, if you're a team player, that is very important, because I hold like research team meetings and we work together on like writing grants and writing publications and writing projects and things like that. So these are the traits that you want to think about that would be transferable to other portions of you know, your research journey.
Okay, we'll get back to your question, Walid, because it's about visas and U.S. Embassy, which is not what we're talking about right now. I'll get back to this. Remind me at the end if I forget. Another question, any information about integrated programs, master? Oh, I think we talked about, in biochemistry, for example.
Yes, it's the same thing. For biochemistry, you might be able to find more chances here, but again, like when they say combined, most of the time it's just like an accelerated version that wouldn't save you like a lot of time, but you're more likely to find programs in biochemistry that do that than you would in health sciences directly.
Okay, and I just want to make something clear here. I think we have a question about this. You mentioned that we have, in public health, we have two tracks. There's clinical and there is, what's the other one?
The research track.
Research, yeah. So you mentioned that for clinical track, it is not transferable to Jordan, meaning they cannot certify their certificate and work in Jordan in the clinical field, right?
Yes.
So DMAC, I think I see the name here is DMAC. Does that answer your question? So someone has a master's of public health from American University, they cannot work in Jordan or their certificate won't be equated. That's only true if they are doing the clinical track. But if they're doing research, that's fine. And I hope this answers your question. Okay, Rania Haimour, I would like to ask about work opportunities after a PhD in health sciences, mainly in terms of availability and possibility to work in different states or in Canada, for example, regarding reference letters. Should it be from a university professor or can it be from a work supervisor?
Okay, so in terms of opportunities for a PhD in health sciences, I'm not quite sure what you mean by interns. If you can clarify that, that would be great. The availability of, you know, positions for public health, for, you know, health sciences and people who have a PhD in health sciences are great in the USA. And we have a lot of shortage in faculty who have PhDs in health sciences, especially, you know, in programs for rehabilitation, occupational therapy, physical therapy. There's always so many positions, and there's a lot of availability for work. Note that for Canada, you can't transfer your degrees to Canada. The health sciences in Canada is extremely different than in the USA, so I can't go and work there. Even though I'm like a certified clinician here, I have like, you know, I'm a board certified clinician, and I also have a research track PhD. I can't work in Canada, and you have to start from zero there. So it's a completely different track. So bear that in mind, so you can't lump sum them together in the same bucket. And regarding the reference letters, should it be from a university professor or a work supervisor? So I said you have to prepare at least 3. Make sure that you have one from one of your professors, one from a work supervisor. If you have worked, if you haven't worked, then I would imagine that that wouldn't be applicable to you. And if you worked in an organization and let's say you're a bit more, you know, seasoned, you're like in your 30s or 40s, it's okay to have like a peer, like a coworker that worked with you, write the letter as well. So you want to show them the traits that you have as a colleague or like, you know, as a collaborator in a specific team. So they don't necessarily all have to be from your professors. Just make sure that you know what they are going to be writing about, okay? And you have to make sure that, you know, you can trust, yes, you can trust that they will, you know, say something nice. Yeah.
Yeah. That's right. And to answer your question, Dima, I think that's true as well for health sciences. If you have a master's, Rawan, in public health, and you're a public health graduate, you can work as a faculty lecturer at the university.
In Jordan, in Jordanian universities.
Asking of, oh, Jordan or Dima, are you talking about Jordan or America? Because I know Dima, she used to live here. So, okay.
In Jordan, yes. So if it's a master's of science in public health, you can. If it's a master's in public health, you can't. You cannot.
Okay.
Okay.
Perfect. And Ma'an, I think you have a question, but maybe you want to use the mic. You want to type your question. It's up to you, Ma'an. Ma'an, Arida, are you still there? Okay, you're still here. You can type your question if you wish. Okay. I'm trying to think of other questions or things that we talk about, but generally this is what we talk about in different, sessions, and I try to do major specific sessions about, requirements and understanding how the context in, I'm glad you mentioned that difference of clinical versus research.
Yeah.
Okay, others, any questions, any comments, clarifications? Okay, and so maybe we don't have any more questions unless...
Hello.
Yes, تفضل معن.
Okay. Good evening, everyone here. This is the first time I'm using this application. I don't work this. I have a question, Dr. Rawan.
Yes.
What about the paper published before work as a strength of the requirement for the Ph.D.?
Yes, so if you have a publication, that definitely strengthens your application. Let me tell you that we do admit people who don't have publications, but as soon as we see that someone has published, they always go up, like all the way up to the top. So if you have like a publication, and let me just note that it has to be like in a peer-reviewed, Scopus, defined journal. So if you published like in a journal that is not cited in like Web of Science or PubMed, usually we don't count these, but it has to be like, in a very, like, let's say quartile 1 or quartile 2, journals. So if you do have that, that will definitely strengthen your application and it becomes, better.
Okay.
Okay, nice. Thank you. I have a second question,
yes.
Please. Where you mentioned before epidemiology. What's the difference between epidemiology and virology? Difference between something?
So epidemiology is the study of public health and populations, and virology is the study of viruses. So they're completely two different tracks. I don't have any experience in virology, but I can speak about epidemiology. Yeah.
I see. Thank you, Rawan.
Yes.
I think...
Thank you.
Ma'an, you can go. You're done? Are you sure? Okay. Tamam.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect. I just want to make sure that we answer everybody's question and we're helping you as much as we can. Dima is still asking Rawan. I think, Dima, if you're doing clinical, ما فيك تشتغلي بالأردن. Rawan, Dima is still asking about this.
Asking about it. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me try to, yes, sure. Okay, so let's say public health. Okay. Let me, okay, خليني أحاول أحكي مثلا بالعربي. هلا نشوف. Okay. هلا في كل شهادة طبية فيها مساق كلينيكي أو كلينيكي، زي مثلا كيف عندكم دكتور الصيدلة مثلا بالأردن. دكتور الصيدلة مساق كلينيكي بخليكي تشتغلي بالكلينكس، بخليكي تشتغلي بالمستشفيات، بس ما بتقدري تشتغلي مثلا كباحثة، عرفتي؟ ما بيهيئك للبحث العلمي. فبس مثلا فالببليك هيلث كمان نفس الشيء. لما نعمل ماسترز اوف بابليك هيلث اللي هو ماجستير الصحة العامة، نفس التراك تبع الصيدلة السريرية أو الصيدلة الدكتور الصيدلة. بس إذا كان ماسترز أوف ساينس اللي هو ماجستير في العلوم في الصحة العامة، هذا يعتبر مساق بحثي بتقدري تكملي عليه الدكتوراه. والدكتوراه كمان Ph.D اللي هي دكتور أوف فيلوسوفي لازم يكون Ph.D in Public Health. هذا بتقدري طبعا تشتغلي فيه بالجامعات الأردنية. بس إذا كان دكتور أوف Public Health زي دكتور أوف فارماسي، زي الصيدلة السريرية، الصحة العامة السريرية، هدول ما بتقدري تشتغلي، ما بتعادلوش بالأردن، ما لهم أي معادلات في الأردن، وtherefore ما بتقدري تقدمي على الجامعات الأردنية اللي تشتغلي هناك فيها كعضو هيئة تدريس.
اوكي، يعطيك العافيه
يا
دكتوره.
عافيكي. هلا.
هو انا بالاصل انا طبيبه اسنان وخلصت ماسترز ان بابليك هيلث من انديانا.
نعم.
بس هو ريسيرش اتوقع not the clinical because it's masters in public health professional health education. هلا لو خلصت PhD برضه from انديانا، هلا بقدر مثلا اروح ادرس في الجامعات الاردنيه بغض
نعم.
النظر clinical او لا.
هل
PhD
البرنامج تبعك ممتاز؟ خلص انت يور
مم.
فاين. انا اللي بحكي عنه اللي هو دكتور اوف بابليك هيلث اللي هو DPH.
اوكي، بس
هذا
PhD in public health it
PhD
works.
you're good. yes.
بس هلا حاليا masters in public health it won't.
ماسترز اوف اللي هي MPH ماسترز اوف
Yeah.
بابليك هيلث لا، خاصه اذا كان فيها المساقات العمليه. انت عمالك بتحكي عن education most likely انه ما عندك اي مشكله رح يكون. هو اللي ما
أوكي.
بتقدري انت تعادليه اللي هو مثلا let's say عملتي مثلا let's say global health for example الكونسنتريشن تبع الام بي اتش، ورحتي مثلا عملتي بليسمنت مثلا بالهند او بامريكا اللاتينيه او شيء زي هيك، هذا ما له مكان انه تقدر تعادليه بالاردن.
اوكي.
فهاي هي المشكله، ما دام انت عامله بالاد بالاديوكيشن بالببليك هيلث you're good to go.
اوكي، شكرا، يعطيك العافيه.
Okay, tamam. Any other questions, clarifications? مش عارفة وليد، مش روان, if you can help with that, I don't know. مش عارفة أقرأ
Yes, okay.
English. They're switching عندي هون. I can't read them من وليد الشرطة.
Okay. أنا معي قبول ماستر من University of North America، وموعد الانترفيو جانيوري بالسفارة تبعي ب 4 جانيوري، بخلص 1/4. أنا هاي له دخل بالسفارة وبالاي 20s. unfortunately ما عندي أي I don't know إذا أنت جماعة بتقدر تجاوبي هذا السؤال.
أنا لأنه عندي الجمل في بعض عم يطلع عربي وإنجليزي مش مزبوط. بدي أسأل عادي لو أروح على السفارة ب1/3 مع 1/4 start I-20. أنا هيك عم بقرأ الجملة ما بعرف ولا مشكلة بتكون. وليد, can you put your mic and clarify this a little bit more? We'll get back to you. سؤال مفلح. If I have a bachelor degree in nursing and master's degree in public health, is it better to complete my PhD in public health or in a specialist that combines nursing with public health, like nursing public health?
It depends زي ما أنت بتحب، يعني ما فيش إشي أحسن من إشي. أظن الأهم هون إنه أنت تلاقي مشرف بيقدر إنه يحتوي الانترستس تبعونك. فحاول إنه تدور على الجامعة اللي فيها البرامج اللي بتلاقي أنت فيها ميولك وشغفك، وإنه دكتور إنه مشرف إنه يقدر إنه يشتغل معك على الميول. ما تحصر حالك بسبيشاليزيشن معين. مثلا أنا هلا بشتغل مثلا بالريفيوجي هيلث، مثلا بالصحة العامة للاجئين والديزاسترز مثلا ريسبونس. PhD تبعتي كانت بالروماتيزم، كان إشي completely different يعني. يعني ما تحاول ما تحصر حالك بسبيشاليزيشن محدد، وكل ما كان في عندك انه سبيشالتيز متنوعه بسموك يعني انه بتصير انه يعني سبيشالست باكثر من اريا. فهذا الشيء بالعكس يعني بزيد انه من عندك. في I think we missed a question من إيباء عبابنا. Is an MD degree an advantage that can help you get a direct PhD? No, it doesn't give you an advantage at all. لا.
Okay, Walid, I'm still waiting for you to put your mic and clarify exactly what is the case like. And Miflih and others, إذا بدكم تعرفوا usually we don't really have that experience. روان نعمل search بالجامعات. So لما بنروح على الموقع الجامعة whatever the university is, عندنا بعدين في الويب سايت تبع الديبارتمنت. على الويب سايت تاع الديبارتمنت حيكون في tabs. مرات بيكون اسمها faculty, sometimes people, sometimes faculty and staff. فإحنا رح نروح على people faculty. رح تلاقوا على كل بروفيسور في عنده his own page رح يكون مكتوب عليها أو profile. رح يكون هناك مكتوب research interest. هيك بنعرف research interest. And sometimes روان إذا كان عندنا professors عندهم خلينا نقول nursing public health major what we're or focus that we are interested in, ممكن يكون عندنا كمان external advisor or external committee member from other universities. Right?
Yes. هلا بالPhD بالعلوم الصحية بالعادة بيكون عندك بانل. البانل بيكون فيها 3 readers من الجامعة نفسها، فبيكون عندك البرايمري منتور، بيكون في 2 ثانيين من أقسام مختلفة بالجامعة، وعادة بيكون كمان في external examiner حدا من برا الجامعة you invite. فusually 4 people، 1 من برا و3 من الجامعة الداخلية.
والexternal could help sometimes filling the gap إذا كان في عندنا focus معين بالresearch ومش موجود عندنا بالجامعة. So that could help. Right?
Yes.
So Walid's question, I have an interview in US Embassy on the 3rd of January, but my start date in school is the 4th. Okay. Same as I-20. So is there any problem I will have in the embassy? So إذا الجامعة بتبدأ on January 4th, بس عندك الامباسي interview on the 3rd. هلا ما بعرف، هلا لو كان في سفر بالموضوع I think it's a problem انه الجامعه already حتبلش وانت لسه بالاردن عندك موعد الانترفيو. هلا بس السنه I have no idea اذا كانت الجامعه is starting online. I can't answer the question. I mean this is يعني السياق هنا او الظرف كثير مختلف. هل انت حتداوم اونلاين؟ رح يكونوا الصفوف عدد هلا السنه الانترناشونال ستودنتس عم يحضروا اونلاين كلاسز او synchronous asynchronous ومش عم يكونوا موجودين physically at the university. So maybe that would work. I'm not sure. What I suggest وليد انك تروح definitely على الانترفيو. بس ما بعرف اذا بدك تحكي مع الجراduate school او مع الديبارتمنت. It's not online. So عندك interview on the 3rd بس انت لازم تكون متواجد بالجامعه on the 4th. I think there is a يعني في مشكله هون. I'm not sure what you can do, but definitely you have to go to the interview and then see what happens.
I think my advice would be to get in touch with the graduate school as soon as possible. احكي مع الجامعة خاصة اليوم أو بكرة إذا بتقدر لأنه قبل ما يعطلوا عشان الكريسماس. واحكي just put them in the context. احكي حطهم بالصورة يعني احكي لهم I'm happy to problem solve معاكم لحتى تلاقوا إنه حل.
وليد ما فيك you can't change when to start the semester. إذا السمستر بلش you have to be in the class, you have to be there. في syllabus, في start dates, end dates. ما فيك تغير إمتى تبلش السمستر بلش. This is when the classes begin. But ممكن تحل المشكلة إنه تحكي مع graduate school. بس زي ما قالت روان هلا يعني season عطل. So عندك اليوم وبكرة الأربعاء is off, خميس is off راحت للاثنين وبعدين كمان في عنا عطلة راس السنة is another one. I think we answered all the questions. Any other comments, questions from anybody? Okay, Rawan, do you have any final recommendation or anything before we leave? My
no, I think I covered most of what I had. I do have a page اسمها Dr. Rawan Al-Heresh. في عليها few videos where I show people how to search للفاكولتي وهاي الأشياء. فإذا عندكم interest يعني تطلعوا عليهم I think it will serve as a good start for you إذا بتحاولوا إنه تبلشوا بالطريقة اللي بعلمها يعني بالفيديوز اللي أنا بعملها.
On Facebook?
على الفيسبوك وعلى الانستغرام. فاسمها دكتور روان الهرش.
تمام. Okay. في كمان سؤال. If my master's thesis is about violence, is it better to complete my PhD in the same thesis?
No, it's not. Usually يعني حاول نوع زي ما حكينا. بعدين domestic violence is a very small area. حاول إنه تعلم إشي جديد بمجال جديد لحتى تزيد ال experiences.
Okay. Thank you so much, everybody.
You are welcome. شكرا لكم.
Thank you guys, and then keep following. Inshallah, we'll have more sessions, different. Sometimes I have somebody suggesting to join and just talk to Jordanians. So we might have somebody else from another university, have different things to help you with, or even answer questions that come up. Okay, you can always leave your questions on my Facebook group, and I can always contact Rawan and see if I can help with that. Okay,
yeah, definitely.
Yes, I will upload this
video
on YouTube. You're welcome, Iba Habibti. Thank you for joining. I will post it on YouTube, and then the YouTube link will be available on Facebook as well. Okay?
Sounds good. شكرا.
تمام. Okay. كل عام وأنتم بخير.
وأنتم بألف خير. Thank you.
You're celebrating. I'll see you later. Take care. Thank you, Rawan.
Thank you. Bye.